Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel, Needed Art History, where I'm sitting telling you some art history stories while knitting. And welcome to the video that I promised already for a few weeks, and we're finally here. So as you can see by the end of the video, today we're going to be talking about women in medieval ages in medieval Europe. Specifically, it will be Western Europe, western part of central also, because we'll be talking about Germany and Austria. We are going to be talking about women and women, not just like women, but women scribes. So it's another video on book illumination. And so this is I was mentioning this already. This is my final paper. This is my diploma for bachelor degree. So I graduated last year in June, the end of June. Yeah, the end of June. So and it was my final paper to get my degree, my final research. And I could have done better maybe, but considering the situation that we were working in, full-scale invasion, like literally middle of full-scale invasion, we were having the presentation and there were like air raid sirens all over Ukraine, and one of our teachers, she was in Kharkiv back then, and they started to bomb Kharkiv, but this woman was still sitting with us on Google Meets, talking with us and listening to, it was crazy, like very surreal experience, but so we have a lot of to cover today, so stop mumbling. So before we'll start, I will tell check the description box below, because I will leave you a list of books, a lot of books. All of them you can find them online, because I was writing this in Ukraine and I was not able to visit some libraries, so I found everything that I could possibly find online. So you can also read all of the books that I will list down. You can read them all online, and you don't have to pay for them. So biggest part of all of them are on archive. What archive? Yeah, you can find it there. So I will link it down below. And I wanted to say about the pictures also, the illustrations for my words. So I think it will be not a lot of them, because there's not a lot of stuff online you can see, unfortunately, because a lot of books need still to be researched, needs still to be attributed, and needs to be photographed. So unfortunately not a lot of things. So but I hope I will find at least something. So what I wanted to say, another stuff, want to say something. So okay, without further ado, let's dive into our topic today. And this is what I want to say, what I will tell you. So today we are gonna be talking, this video today will be mostly on the side of history and on the side of culture rather than art. So I'll be telling you the overall situation with women, so their economical, political, social situation in medieval ages in Western Europe. Then we are going to, because the main theme is women scribes, we are going to be talking, I will try to briefly tell you about monasteries, women's monasteries, and the situation with that, and how it all started, and what they were doing there, and all of the situation. And then at the end of the video, I'll be just again getting into a brief mentioning of some of the names of women scribes and women artists that we know for a fact, and we know that this is their works for sure. Some of them not for sure, but just overall the names. And maybe if you would be interested, you would be able to go and research it on your own more deeply, because I was writing in my diploma, I was writing deeply about two women, about two works, but if I would mention those two things, also it will be video for 3+ hours. So I might make just the video on this topic solely. So this is everything I want to say, and so let's dive into our topic. So I don't think that I need to explain you, right, that the situation with studying women is it was very well sad till like 1960s, 70s, and in the period of like new time, new history, situation was pretty bad, because in the period of like medieval period, situation was kind of fine, so there were researchers, there were men that were writing about women, well, maybe not in a good way, but they were still writing, they were still mentioning about them, and at least there were some kind of names that were preserved. Well, in the period of new history, for new time, so starting from 17th century, the situation started to get very bad, because a lot of philosophers, like not modern, I'm sorry, a lot of philosophers that we now know were putting a lot of, don't know how to call it normally. So for example, you see, one of the men that we can like thanks is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, so a very famous French philosopher, and not just philosopher, he was writing some works that that we are actually using in psychology now, and a lot of stuff in cultural also studies, in social studies, so well, very big name. And he was one of those men, one of these persons that were pushing this agenda about that women are lower than men, they're not so intelligent, they're not capable of doing anything, and they're not capable of creating anything really valuable, and thus thus they are lower than men. And so this agenda was pushed everywhere. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he was like a very famous, not just in France or in like neighboring countries, but he was like all over, literally all over the Europe, and I mean like in Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and yeah, so that was the situation, like 17th century, 17, 18, 19, there was really, I think, a downhill of everything, because previous to that, and I was reading, so we were getting now into the social, economical, and political situation, and like cultural position of women. So I was reading, and I was like, I was surprised about a lot of things that I found actually. And sometimes, I was reading, I was like, that's actually not so bad. This like not so bad as we tend to think. But then I would read another paragraph, and there would be another some kind of really crazy thing going on. Then I'd be like, oh, okay, it is actually that bad. Then again, I would read another paragraph, and it would be another topic, and it would be like, oh, but wait, this is not bad actually. I mean, you can live. It was kind of fine. And then you would read another, and again, like another page, and it again would be like this, and you'd be like, oh my god, no, it is indeed, it was very bad. So yeah, so some of the things are familiar to us, so we know them. Some of the things I think you will find interesting also, and unexpected even. The situation was like, obviously, that the privileges, like at the beginning, at the early period of time, early medieval ages, the privilege was granted just for very rich women, because this period of time there were no such thing as bourgeois, for example, so they were just rich and poor. And obviously the women from the poor background, they didn't have any rights at all. They depended, not only on their husbands if they were married, but they were dependent also on their landlord. There's this trend on TikTok right now, this like when people from the past are asking, what are you doing to people the money time and this stuff. And the number of girls that I'm seeing that are filming this, that like women are asking like, oh, what are we doing, where are you going now? And she's like, oh, I'm going to work. And they're like, oh, we can finally work. I mean, I know that it's a video, I know, I'm not a fun person at parties, but but every time like I'm seeing this was like, we can finally work, I'm like, oh my god, girl, like our ancestors, our women ancestors, like they worked so hard. You need to phrase it correctly. So are we getting paid now? Yes, we're getting paid now, like, and sometimes even a very good salary, sometimes even a bit higher than men. This is the thing, this is what actually is happening, because women were working all the time. Women were working the same as men, on the same level, on the same professions, as hard as men. And yeah, so this is not something new for our society. The difference is that men were paid, women were not. And men were written down in history, women were not. This is the biggest difference, you know? So yeah, so I'm always cringing on this trend, on these videos about we can finally work. Like, girl, we worked all the time. Sometimes even more than men. But, well, okay. Okay, the only, situation was might have been a bit different, for women who were, I mean, we're still talking about poor women, was like a bit different with women of a childbirth age. They were like protected. They were still working as much as you can imagine, but this work mostly acquired, the household chores, some, I don't know, picking berries, like growing vegetables, herbs, cooking, I don't know what else, like doing some dishes, dyes, I don't know, brewing like beer, making candles, and etc. etc. But yeah, they were not like doing like hard physical labor somewhere, I don't know, in the fields, but they were still working quite a lot. But because they were of childbirth age, they were, again, as I said, like protected. So yeah, so the situation was like that, because obviously, the feudals, they needed as much of work force as possible, and that's why, it was like that. So starting from also this old period of time, like one of the fields that was mainly women's field is weaving, obviously. Well, not obviously, I don't know why obviously, but weaving was one of the fields like that. And so when we know from a very old period of time, there were the whole workshops that were, just women were allowed to work there, and there was just a women place, even though the head of the workshop, the head of this guild was a man still, but well, so this type of workshop, you see what is also was the saying that they needed to produce a certain amount of this textile product per year, and thus, a lot of women were working there, and the work was constant because the numbers were very big, and the process of making textile back then was not a fast one, so you needed to work like a lot of time. Thus, those women, they didn't have any time, they had no freedom, they had like no intellectual skills for creativity. Privileged ladies were in somehow, more positive position. So starting from the 6th century, they had the right to manage the lands during the departure of their husbands. Or just, overall, like some male representative of the family. And even they were able to inherit those lands. For the most part, they could control these lands as they liked. Therefore, individual women had power and influences in their, in their part of the country where they lived, and they were having these lands. However, everything could change, obviously, with marriage, which was essentially, and still at this point, in certain situation, is just like, a political and economical agreement. So after marriage, a woman faced undeniable obligations, which are like, she was obligated now to be obedient, to be submissive. She had no rights to leave her home alone, on her own, without anyone else, participate in some discussion of very important issues, and etc. etc. In fact, women became, just after the marriage, which became just a common resource for the birth of the heir, and the right to inherit land, one may say, was almost the only positive thing in these situations. Initially, marriage was recognized as a unit of social relations only for nobles or those who were freed from slavery by feudals, which were very rare situation, very rare occasions. And and there's interesting stuff. So I found it in one of the books that I researched. So there was like one woman, one researcher. She studies this woman question, and so she was writing that there is apparently in history 3 types of marriages. So I'm sorry, I will butcher this name because I had not found how to pronounce these names. Those are like old terms. So this first term is the first type of marriage is Raubeche. So this is basically, you know, kind of like robbery one. So this is basically when men were taking women and they were running away together without, you know, getting like engaged in church or something like that. The second one was Friedelehe, so that was marriage without a contract, and Muntehe was marriage with a contract. To preserve the interest of the nobility, it was, you see, was the last form of marriage that became universally recognized and acceptable. However, Friedelehe was also, well, popular in a lot of territories and for a pretty long period of time. And this marriage did not involve the custody of the husband over the wife and had more the appearance of an ordinary agreement between the partners. It could be cancelled, what is important, and you could have also actually changed it to Muntelehe anytime you wanted. Free, totally, completely free women, they almost didn't exist. So there were some kind of exceptions, but they are exceptions rather than a rule. Women could not appear in court on her own. She was always represented by a man who was her guardian and acted as a defender, representative, and, well, to be honest, basically like a master, actually. In the case of an unmarried woman, the guardian was her father. If she didn't have anyone, I mean, neither father nor husband, it was someone else, you know, it was like big brother or like, I don't know, someone, some kind of cousin or whatever. Just, it was overall just someone from the family, some male figure. The guardian could dispose of a woman's life as he wanted, and even sometimes he could literally just sell her. Even though she's a noble woman, still they didn't care. It is interesting that in the 6th century, the law of the Franks in the northern part of Central Europe limited the husband's ability to manage his wife's property. Now he only had the right to manage it and could not sell it, since according to the law it was her property. And this moment was very important as it provided a very strong financial support for the widows. But not complete freedom still. Guardianship over a widow, according to Saxon tribal law, was transferred in such a case to the eldest son or the closest male relative. So the only thing women could dispose were just her clothes and her jewelries. The Lombard law, on the other hand, were more favorable to widows and firstly allowed them to remarry of their own choice, and secondly forbade them to be forcibly sent to a monastery until a year had passed after the death of her husband. So widows enjoyed this freedom, obviously, to the fullest extent. So for the most part, these women acted as customers and patrons, which will be discussed a bit later, because the question of patronism is also a very important question in studying women. So creativity was obviously also influenced by marriage. So this question of marriage. From early times, girls were married off at the age of like 15, right? Even sometimes younger, so like 12, 13. And so it's not like a lot of time to master some kind of a skill on a very high level. The number of children also, the household size, family status, all of this also affected a time that was available for her creativity. In addition to the fact that all of these factors took time, they also affected health, especially the childbirth process, and because this process was fatal for women for quite a long time, which also didn't have a positive effect on female creativity. Plus, a lot of postpartum depression. We can just imagine how many women were struggling from this, because it's a taboo now, and you can imagine what was in a medieval period of time. Interesting changes started to appear in 11th century, because in this period of time, a lot of, like most of the people, they began to lead a sedentary lifestyle as the level of development of agricultural production in like developed areas allowed it. And it was, the period of time where not the already cities that existed, they started to develop even more. Just overall, new cities started to appear and also started to develop very, very quickly. They were founded based on the convenience of placement. Cities thus, on banks of the rivers, on very busy roads and stuff like that. Cities also developed around the feudal castles, monasteries, episcopal residences, and etc. Already in the period of 11th to 12th century, all these settlements began to turn into developed cities with a completely new economic structure, which consisted in independent production, establishment of exchange with other settlements, and etc. Decisive for the development of cities was the adoption of new property law, according to which artisans and merchants could operate independently of the feudal lord. So in the 11th century, the city dwellers, they took a rather strong economic and social position. So they opposed any obstacles that could prevent them from enjoying all the benefits of the new life. These obstacles included the rights of feudal lord to impose some custom duties, control markets, retain certain judicial rights, and etc., etc. In addition, to the privileges of feudal, people started also to oppose the privilege of church. So the achievement of complete or almost complete independence of city from their masters gave birth to this very well-known expression that city air makes one a free person. So how does this situation, how this development of cities changed the, affected women's rights? Everyone in the city had the opportunity to earn. The main idea of living in the city was to accumulate this financial capital, even if it was very minimal. This meant maintaining the family property and leading a fairly frugal life. Therefore, it was necessary that everyone who could work in the family, they worked, including women. So such traditional fields, we can say, like textile, basket weaving, not weaving, basket making, knitting, and etc., were all on women. Women whose husbands were itinerant traders also took over the running of the family business, and they had to work with business partners, make payments, collect information about the state of the market and all the stuff, and also think about how to marry their children. So thus a new group, new social group emerged in the cities, and in the city's economic structure, its parents and their unmarried children. It was now very important for these urban families to maintain and accumulate as much as possible, to pass all of this to their children. So women also took on a role of custodians of this heritage, both from the feudal lord and from other relatives. And although you see lords, like now technically by law, they were limited in their encroachment on the cities. However, obviously those are feudals, and they tried to sneak, and they tried to find some ways how to change all of this. So sometimes they were making some scenarios, so they were claiming someone's share of the inheritance. Very popular thing was they were seducing women, the townswomen, working women, some widows also, and then they were taking everything from them, or they were seducing them, and they were marrying them with some of their people, some of their slaves basically, and then they were taking everything also that these women had. So yes, situation was very not okay. However, people were not just sitting and being okay with that. They were actually, if feudal was doing something so openly disrespectful, they were actually taking actions on him. Sometimes they were even taking some of the weapons, and they were literally just going and trying to burn this feudal down. And it is known, we have some documents with some preserved records, that women also take part. They were also taking weapons in their hands, and they were taking part in all of this equally with men. And in this period of time, there was also this rule that appeared that said that if you lived in a city for a year and 1 day, you are automatically becoming a free person. So also this is where this saying about cities air make one a free person comes from. So this rule was also applying to both men and women. If they were running out, they were some kind of slaves under some feudal, and they were running out to the city very harsh year. You know, they needed to hide very good because all obviously feudals were searching for them to return them back because it was like a working force. But yeah, but if you were able to hide yourself for 1 year and one day after that in the city, and yeah, you became a free person eventually. However, even with these minimal rights and opportunities, a woman was still completely under the care of her husband. The situation became so similar to those of these wealthy women. Husband defended women in court, dealt with family property, and etc. Widows even lost some of their privileges actually, because now their inheritance primarily passed to the children, and in case of remarriage, she had the right to a small share of it. In some communities, after marriage, widows, they generally lost the right to encroach on the deceased husband inheritance. A little change in favor of women happened in 12th century, at the end of 12th century to be correct, when due to economic changes and the growing needs for women's help in trade and crafts, the rights of both partners to jointly acquired property began to be recognized. In addition, the rules of forced marriages began to be abolished throughout Western and Central Europe. So in some areas, women were able to choose on their own who they want to marry, and they were able to choose some partner to their children also, but such a provision did not mean complete freedom of choice in the modern sense, obviously. Marriages were still, at the most part, this political and economical interest. It's just, you know, the difference was that now it was not the feudal who was interested in it, but just the family itself. It was absolutely necessary that the bride, the young bride, had an impeccable reputation. And this led to another aspect of freedom of the city, the guarantee of personal protection through the law. This, first of all, concerned the abduction of a young woman, raped and slander. So the punishment for all of this stuff was death penalty, for men, I mean. But however, the adoption of such laws did not give anything in particular, because the situation has not changed much even in our period of time now. It's not easy to prove even now to prove this violence, because in any case we will be, I mean, women, guilty of the fact that our human rights were violated. And in Middle Ages, situation was like this. So if you wanted to go to the court, you needed to have two witnesses with you, one of which needed to be a man, obviously a man. And and it's like interesting because obviously people are raping other people, like women particularly, in front of everyone, or I don't know how to call it right. So okay. And well, sometimes cases were successful, women were winning and men were killed, but most of the times it was like, it was a shame for everyone. And already in this period of time, mostly women were not telling anything. And because they knew that no one will believe them. And and they, at the end of the day, they will be the one who will be guilty for that. Like, for example, a very famous also case was with actually an artist. I love her, amazingly love her. So her name is Artemisia Gentileschi. So she was an Italian master, Italian Baroque painter, and amazing painter. Really highly suggest you to search her up, to look her up, because I will not make any video on her because there's like a lot of things about her on YouTube in very great details with archives and all of this stuff, so you can find a lot of stuff. I'm not sure that I will be able to add something interesting and new to this topic, so yeah. But situation was like this. She was raped when it was like 16, 18, something this period of time, because different resources say different age, but it was, well, basically she was in her late teenage years. She was raped by one of the students of her father. And so she told her father that she was raped. The situation was like this, and her father was like, well, we need to go to the court, and this was exactly what they did. And well, this young girl, this child, it's a child, she got through torture, and I'm not exaggerating, a little torture. what they were doing, they were putting her hand under the press, especially her fingers, and they were just basically crushing her fingers. To be honest, I don't really know whether like, well, obviously she had some kind of trauma, so I don't know whether she had broken fingers or not, but I assume actually she might have, because from what I've read, it was very brutal, and that was, it was continuing not for like a day or two, it was for quite a bit of time. And at the end of the day, so they won the court. Interestingly, he was not put under the torture. He was not tortured like that. He was just questioned, but well, okay. And yeah, so at the end of the day, Artemisia with her father, they won this case, this court, and it was good because her reputation was now fine. But at the end of the day, well, basically, he got away with that because I think so. He got like 1 year of prison or something like that, but he didn't go to prison at all. So, as I said, at the end of the day, he was just fine. She was left with complete trauma. But after that, she started to work very intensely, and a lot of her works, like in a lot of these works, you can see this energy, you can see this anger, I think, even. So yeah, so amazing works, and really highly suggest you to search it up. And another thing, so getting back to our topic, another thing in order to what this situation led is that the prostitution, obviously the brothels started to thrive, especially in very large cities and especially in port cities. And obviously, so the sex workers, those were the women that lost completely all of her rights, all of possible human rights. So she was basically like a dirt. And so basically, so we, can summarize very briefly that brothels and all of this was developed even more and created in big cities for the sake of men to not go on the streets and rape some random women, basically. But we are the problem. We women are the problem. And all, and short dresses are the problem, because this is exactly what women in 12th century was wearing in medieval Europe, very short dresses. And well, I'm sorry, I'm getting heated up a bit because this theme of prostitution, this theme of like sex work, it's such, I just, the sheer amount of people that have no empathy and no understanding of all of this situation and empathy for these women is just, it's like, it's not funny. It's actually very scary. The amount of people that are saying when something's happening with these women and they're saying, wait, well, but they knew what they were doing. Especially it's funny to hear all of this from men who, as if you are not the one who are mainly buying their services, and like, so you are fine, you are good, you are okay, but the woman that is providing the services is not. And considering also, like, years ago I started to get a bit deep into these themes, I started to read some articles, I started to read some researches and statistics and all of this stuff, and and just looking at the numbers of what is going on and how many people are sex trafficked and how many women are in this industry without their own will. It's scary, it's not even, it's a very light word for this. It's a terrifying stuff. And again, the amount of people that don't understand this, that okay, even if she got there, because it's still in medieval period of time, women were gotten in this on their own because they were so desperate, because there were no work, there were nothing, and they and they needed to earn money at least somehow, and they were getting in this situation. But it doesn't mean that that they needed to be treated, that they are treated, and they are still treated like this. And it just it's like same goes with I have the same feelings here with like sex work and with suicide, that when people are saying like, oh, but she got there on her own, and like and with suicide, also like he killed himself or her, like la la la. The first things that I'm having is that how fucking disgusting this person's life needed to be, how much pain this person needed to have in her life, that she decided, or he decided, that those were the only options that they had. Now, there's also a topic about you have a choice. You always have a choice. What choice exactly has it? I don't know, a 13-year-old girl that was abducted from the street and sold into sex trafficking? What choice she had? Tell me, please. Like, what is this about? What choice? Again, those who are getting into all of this thing. Well, okay, I will not start. I'm sorry. Let's move on. Because this is a very controversial topic. I understand. And I have like, if I will get deep into my thoughts on this, it will be another video. But it just, the situation was like this. As I said, basically, brothels, prostitution was flourishing because men created this field again to themselves, so they will not go around on the streets and rape random women. Amazing. Thumbs up, like 10 out of 10. Like, I will not recommend this. So basically, yeah, and as I said, women in this period of time, already, they were lured into this biggest part of them. There were still some percentage that were going out there on their own to get at least some money. Even smaller percentage, we don't need to forget about this, that were going there because they wanted. They really genuinely wanted, because they liked sex or something like that. So we don't need to forget about those type of women also. But the biggest part of these women were lied to and were exploited, and they really didn't want it to be there. So just basically what we can say, it was a field that was developed by men for needs of men, and as a result engaged in the total terror of women who were either recruited by promises of good earnings or went into this field voluntarily just for the sake of having at least some kind of earnings. So in the 13th, 15th century, the rapid development of many cities known today took place. So many of them began to specialize in certain areas, which led to an even greater development of trade. Accordingly, the need for workers increased. So again, women were needed even more than ever. And I mean more than ever in shops, in workshops, and etc. Jobs were created for women in crafts and trade, in banking, in lending. They could work now in hotels, and etc. etc. Such successful participation in the accumulation of family wealth, in the development of their economic and social influence of the family, made it possible for women to lead a more independent professional life. Women have achieved a wide range of occupations that often required a high level of also intellectual ability. So you see, this was a consequence of that fact that the townspeople also did not neglect the education of their children, girls included. There are known documents, so some researchers found documents of the 13th century that indicate the success of independent women in the field of trade in such countries as Italy, a bit later in France also, and they acted as investors, women, as suppliers of some goods, and they also shared profits or losses equally with men. More and more guilds appeared in where women worked, just women worked, but well, obviously, as I already said, they were still supervised by men. These were usually textile guilds, so continue with textiles theme. Widows could now hold the position of masters in some meat, fish, and bakery guilds. Guilds also that produced some hats, guilds that were producing some leather goods, and etc. etc. The situation was especially interesting in Paris. From the tax books from the 13th, 14th century, we know that there were about 321 professions in Paris back then, and women were able to engage in 108 of them, something like this. So, well, almost half of the profession. So, interesting indicators, I think. However, I need still to point out that this situation with Paris was kind of unique. There was not a popular thing that was going on throughout the Europe. Plus, Paris at this period of time was a very large city, so it was 80,000 people, and yeah, so it was more we can say exception of the rules rather than overall practice in Europe. This can be observed compared to English guilds. So I was already mentioning in some of the videos that in England the situation was worse than everywhere else in Europe, that women were completely altered out. They were completely out of touch with everything, even though they worked still as much and equally as men. However, with guilds, you see the situation was that so women were not able to get into the guild if they were not well, if you were not a wife of the owner of the guild, or if you were not a servant of a wife of owner of the guild. So situation was like this. However, obviously these rules were not were breaking down, or how to call it, because well, there were a lot of work needed to be done, and thus obviously women were taken, like, even if you were not master's wife or her servant or whatever, you will still be in the guild, but you will be paid less, you will be not, you know, recorded, and yeah, so situation was very, very bad there. So as for the artist field, it is now documented that women, especially in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, worked as illuminators. So we know this for sure. They helped their husbands or father as a rule executing initials, some decorative elements, and etc. Since in the period of 12th and 13th century, the creation of manuscripts went beyond the boundaries of monasteries. So in German, women drew playing cards also. They also painted dolls. They were doing some wood carvings even, and etc. The only artistic field where women were not recognized at all were music and theater, well, in biggest part of Europe. So obviously, again, there were some exceptions. There's always exceptions from the rules, but overall music and theater, there was part of the art world that were not, you know, women were completely out of touch there. With music even, it was interesting that in some of the parts you could actually be burned as a witch. I don't know the, you know, the chemistry behind that, basically. So I mean, why man is not considered a witch if he's playing the music, but woman is considered a witch? You know, it's the same thing as was with math. Women doing math is like, what? Crazy. That's a witch, you know, while men doing math is completely fine. So yeah, same situation. With theater also, it was actually for a very long period of time. So I'm not a historian in theater, but I know a bit about this because I was studying literature and stuff like this, whatever. And well, biggest part of theater is like history. In history of theater, the biggest things, like for example ancient Greek theater, women were not allowed as actresses there, so all of the roles were played by men, and exquisitely by men. Then like popular kabuki, Japanese theater, also, and as far as I am aware, it actually still goes on like this now. They still have this tradition. Women is not allowed to play any roles. Men are playing everyone. Commedia dell'arte, you know, this theater of masks, Italian one that also emerged, you know, was like the renaissance of theaters, we can say. Same thing, men were playing everyone, and just it overall was very interesting stuff, because in this theater of masks they had just 2 sets of masks. So it was like 2 sets, I mean, like, and there were different characters in this set. And yeah, and interestingly also that when the actor was choosing what mask he will be playing, it was the mask for the rest of your life. So you were playing this character for the rest of your life, or you were not able to change this mask anymore. And well, you might say that, oh, but it's boring. I think it was kind of boring, but the situation was with this theater is that a lot of stuff, they didn't have really scenarios. So a lot of things were improvised. So, you know, they had just overall story that was canon, as we can say, but then they were, you know, going here and there, and they were improvising, and thus, you know, I think it was fine to play the mask for the rest of the life. So it was like this here also. Another very important question that need to be talked about, you know, important talking, is the topic of patronage, actually, because well, so researchers started to study this topic not so long ago. And we found a lot of interesting stuff, actually. And I mean, this theme is still needed to be like again studied even more, but from what we already know, so this was one actually of the niches where women had a certain freedom. We can basically say that this was almost the only area where the role of women was acceptable and provided ample opportunity for their voices to be heard, because they were speaking through the projects and works that they were supporting, right? Therefore, it is also important to study the issues of patronage, because it will allow those who did not have the opportunity to express themselves to be heard. Except for the few female writers, the surviving letters, and the vocalization given to women by male authors, the numerous female voices has been virtually eradicated from the history by the 17th century. Only from this last decades of the last century do we begin to discover their creativity and place in society. Examining this question will allow us to see women's strategy of self-development in a world that did not particularly care for it, offering them not much beyond elementary education and male guardianship. So the patronage of women in medieval period, in Middle Ages, was much more common than we used to think, and the influence of women on the development of art was much more significant than it seemed. This is a difficult question to study, because in some cases we can easily identify, the patrons from references in the text or some dedication, etc., etc. In others, it's there's like nothing because writers and artists did not clearly indicate their benefactors. And another thing why it's also difficult, because obviously these patrons, they were some of them were very active in the work, and they were actively taking part. They were saying that oh, I want this topic to be illuminated, for example. I want this part to be written down. I want this and that. I want to the illustration for this topic needed to be like this and that. Basically they were creating the composition, and they were using just other hands to create their vision that they had in their heads. Others, they were just they were they were there, they were just doing this. They were patronizing some stuff because it was privilege. Not what is this word? Prestige. Yeah, because it was very prestige, and you were kind of obligated. If you were rich, you were kind of the same thing as now. You were all these rich people, they sometimes they donating some stuff. They don't really care about this at all, but they they need to show themselves that they're you don't even know how to call them. But yeah, but there was a situation like this. But most of the time, as I understood from what I was reading, women were actively taking part in this, because there was, again, as I said, one of the fields where they had freedom to do whatever they wanted. Also, obviously, sometimes they had some problems with some of the masters, because some of the masters themselves were kind of sexist guys, and even the the woman might have took a very active part in creating this manuscript, not physically, but by communication. They would still not write down her name and something like this, because they were the woman starting from a early Middle Ages, that was a privilege just of a very rich woman, and it's just starting from the late Middle Ages, some bourgeois women, they were also able now to be patrons of certain topics, right? Most often widows acted also as patrons, because they were the ones who received a certain freedom in managing their wealth and land, and also abbesses and nuns also often was patrons. Interestingly, also a lot of those who were patrons, they were actually coming from the family that had history of patronage, and it was kind of a tradition thing in their families. However, what is even more interesting, that even in these fields, even in these situations, I mean, when your whole family is literally coming from the tradition of patronage, and you're literally just kind of obligated even to do that, women still were facing some double standards. Because if women, again, even if she was from a family with a extended history of patronage, and she was encouraged to be a patron of something, if she was paying too much money to different projects and stuff, she, that was interpreted as extravagance, and I don't know, it was, it looked down, she was looked down on because of that. While if men were doing all of this, that was considered his virtue, so even here it was like, it doesn't make any sense, you know. A lot of art, literature was also a field where women were customized and a lot of stuff. So for example, in the 14th century there was a particularly high demand for novels about women that showed them in a good light and that were sponsored by women. The most famous, for example, I already mentioned, I think, in the beginning of the video. I already forgot what I was talking at the beginning. So Boccaccio's work about women that was created for Andrea Acciaiuoli. I'm sorry if I butchered the name. There is another very well-known woman, a rich woman, Christine de Pizan, and she was a noble woman. She was married, her husband died, she became a widow, and she decided she didn't want to go to monasteries, she didn't want to do anything, she wanted to write. And this is exactly what she did. She became a very famous poet, and she's considered actually to be the first actually female writer in history, or well, something like this. I mean, a professional female writer, because she was getting money and she was very fond of this, and people were fond of her work. And her most famous book, my god, I'm full of this. Okay, was the book of the City of Ladies, so in this book she's like, you know, she was like showing that this like city where just women lived and how happily they lived without men and all this stuff. And she was thinking like, why the hell men are talking some BS on us if they're literally being our masters, you know, and all of these things. And like, what is going on, why men hate women so much, you know. So that was her things. But a part of the fact that she was writing, she was herself making money herself, she also supported some craftswomen. And she, like, for example, it's a very known relationship of Christine de Pizan with an illuminator, Anastasia. So unfortunately there's not a lot of information about this Anastasia on internet. However, there are some books written about her, and they are out of stock. They are old, they're like from 70s or 80s, so I will not able to find them, and I'm so curious. I want to read these books, but I can't find them anywhere now. I can just even order, because I can't imagine, you know, how much it will cost me. But yeah, it is said that Christine de Pizan, she ordered some illuminations to her book from this Anastasia. Yes, so she was also, you know, supporting illuminators. Interestingly, also in the Middle Ages, a lot of women actually were supporting universities. Like they're like giving money for universities and colleges when they were founded. You know, those places where they were not even allowed to go. So, you know, again, men were benefiting from women's like from widows' money and all of this, but they were not allowing them to be present there. Interestingly also, that many women, they supported writers who wrote in a more comprehensive vernacular, thereby developing secular literature. Since they were not particularly concerned with Latin tradition, they were at the forefront of the new folk genres. Thus, it is currently known from research that the first quasi-romance, for example, the first novel about King Arthur, the first secular bestiary, some of the first translations of Bible, actually, all of this was at some point customized by women. In general, it can be said that women's sponsorship of various things was limited not so much by gender, by economic and legal restrictions, which, you know, comes from her gender, so it's like historical. In this way, women were able to overcome all the structures that were created to reinforce male values and participate in cultural processes where they could express and confirm the point of view, as well as help shape the cultural environment of their time and future generations. Also, looking at the works that were mostly sponsored by women, you can understand that at all of the time, women was actually very much aware of the disadvantages of being a woman in a world that is meant to men. This can especially be seen in the establishment of nunneries, particularly in orders that resisted the involvement of women in the sponsorship of literary works that raised themes of the place of women and described women in a positive light, as opposed to these gynophobic works of the clergy. A clear motive for many female patrons, whether conscious or unconscious, was the desire to express their views and influence the social attitudes of their times. We can say with confidence that if it were not for their efforts in these fields, this world would never actually have seen an incredible number of literary and actually artistic works. And now very briefly about overall monasteries and what the situation was with monasteries before we'll get into, I will show you some of the works, examples, and show some of the names. So you see the situation with nunneries, so convents, well, men monasteries were always fine, it was always good, but the most developed women's monasteries were in the early period of time, in early medieval times, before like, not before, like till like 11th century, something like that. And well, nunneries were also, which, you know, for my surprise, that was one of the fact that I was very much surprised about, that that was a place where mostly just rich women were able to get there, because they were, you know, if you wanted to go to the nunnery, you needed to pay some dowry. Thus, you know, poor women, it was very, very rare for a poor woman to go to the monastery. So that was basically, you know, places where rich women were just running from their husbands. And I mean, I can understand, because here there were a lot actually of freedom. They were able, you know, they were constantly studying, they were constantly reading stuff, they were constantly having some, you know, they were painting, you know, they had a lot of time to master some of their skills, to become very intelligent, very smart, not just women, I mean just human beings overall. And well, and nuns were considered one of the smartest, like nuns and monks, they were considered to be the smartest part of the population. And well, obviously, like why all this started, you know, why I started to research this topic is because like my previous video was on the Anglo-Saxon book miniature. That was like my work that I my final also work of my third year in university. And I mean, obviously I saw all of this work, you know, I was also writing, I was also reading about monasteries and how they were founded and what, you know, what rules were there and stuff like this. And I started to get a very, I mean, I think it's a logical question, and a lot of researchers put it, you know, a lot of researchers asked this question also, that how come, if there were scriptoriums in men's monasteries, there's like more probably that there were scriptoriums in women's monasteries, right? Because obviously there were not so many monasteries, like women monasteries, as there were men's ones. However, there were like quite a bit of them. For a certain period of time, the popular stuff was also the mixed ones, actually, the mixed monasteries, so with men and women. And those type of convents also most probably had some scriptoriums, right? And men and women in this type of monasteries, they were working equally. The only thing was that, you see, by some of the church rules, because of also Apostle Paul, women were not allowed to be preachers. That's like one of the main difference among the situation among men and women. But overall, so even in this mixed ones, there were some female masters that were also creating, like illuminating stuff, they were rewriting stuff. So I mean, why we don't know their names? And this is like, you know, this is how my curiosity started in this topic. But getting back, you see, so women were like, so women were getting into this, like rich women were getting into the monasteries, because here they were able, you know, to develop their leadership, to develop their like organizational qualities, and etc. And in early Middle Ages, nunneries were also some like they were literally cultural centers, and they had a very big influence actually on some of the parts, because a lot of these nunneries, they were actually owning like a lot of land, and I mean it, like a lot of land. So they were very influential in some of the parts. This influence was held till like 11th century, because in 11th century, you know, the power of church as as religious stuff thing, my god, how to call it, started to decline, and church became more this, you know, like political and economical part of society, and obviously started to influence women's nunneries a lot. In England, for example, after this period of time, there were barely any, I mean, we're talking about Catholic England still, there were barely any new nunneries created. However, there were a lot of men's monasteries that were created. Again, say, situation in England is the worst out of all of the Europe. So yeah, and well, another thing why nunnery started to decline was because universities started to flourish. So now the centers of education and cultural centers were universities, and as well known, universities were not allowed, women were not allowed in universities. And yeah, and so the language, Latin started to lose its power also, and well, nunneries were mostly, it's a Latin environment. And yeah, and the other thing why also, they started to decline is because women's like works in these nunneries were more like kind of archaic, as we can say, naive, because they were not able, this is another thing which also an interesting topic, they were not able, to get their hands on modern pieces of art, modern book illumination, while their men colleagues, they were constantly looking into, they were constantly in time and in touch with this styles that were changing. So, so for example, while men's monasteries and scriptoriums were already doing some books with very distinctive Gothic features of their illumination, women were still, women masters, they were still creating some kind of naive, some kind of Romanesque pieces of art, which, it's like already old for like a century, this style. So yes, so situation was also like this. As I said, this topic of study is kind of new in art history, and every year, every decade, researchers, they're finding new and new interesting stuff, and new names. A lot of works needed to be attributed. A lot of works, unfortunately, are, we know them just because not because thanks to some of the records, but we don't have them physically anymore. They are destroyed, or they were stolen, or they are maybe laying somewhere that we don't know where. So yeah. And well, after the 11th century, as I said, the 10th, 11th century, when the decline started, like almost everywhere in Europe, the only part where, with women scribes, with women artists, the only country where everything was fine, it was Germany. They still had a lot of monasteries, nunneries, they still had a lot of masters. And because you see, Ottonian Empire, it was the period of Ottonian Empire, and it was actually very interesting because they really understood, and well, maybe not understood, I don't know how to describe it right, but they were supporting women's art, they were supporting women artists, they were supporting to develop all of this stuff, and and the situation was like this, was very positive in Germany especially. So now let's get into our like main topic. So I will show you some of the examples, some of the names also that like we know for sure. So starting from the early Middle Ages, we already know examples of work on which nuns worked or helped in the creation of a manuscript as illuminators or scriptors. So around year 800, the monastery of Chelles, under Charlemagne's sister Giselda, produced 13 volumes of manuscripts worked on by women, such as a 3-volume commentary on the Psalms signed by 9 women scribes. Another famous example of work of women is the commentaries on the Apocalypse of the Spanish Saint Beatus of Liébana from the year around 786. This is a group of Spanish manuscripts of the 10th, 11th centuries. Saint Beatus, he lived in this, 8th century, and manuscript was created, the series of manuscripts was created in 10th, 11th centuries. So now we know 24 copies, and so this copies contains the commentaries of Beatus and are decorated with numerous stylistically unique miniature for Europe. This is generally the first documented example of a woman's work on an extended cycle of miniatures. Manuscripts were created by Christian monks under the influence of Muslim formal and decorative tendencies that is in this, it's called like Mozarabic style. Especially famous is the Beatus of Girona, on which the monk Emetrius worked. We also know that the nun Enda helped him with this illumination. So the first name that we know for sure. So she called herself Depintrix, that is the artist, and Dei Aiutrux, that is the helper of the Lord. Most of the illustrations in Beatus are made in a flat decorative style with stylized images of John's visions, and are mixed with some ornamentation and careful attention to naturalism. As I already mentioned a few times, way worse situation was in British Isles, so we don't know a single name, we don't know anyone, we don't know any scriptoriums, like we don't know nothing, because they did not preserve anything from this from women's job. The only thing that might be some women's job is the biotapestry. So it is considered to be like one of the examples of women's work, but even this we can't confirm this. It is made this conclusion made solely on the fact that weaving and embroidery, it was the women's job in England, and it's like just women's job. There were like barely any man in this field. So yeah, but even this we cannot be 100% sure about this. But in terms of illumination, blank, nothing. The best situations with women's creativity was on the territory of modern Germany. So the great monasteries continued to flourish and be placed as places of learning, as Germany during this period was the first region to restore stable government after the death of Charlemagne and the collapse of his empire. So during the reign of Otto I, the German kingdom was considered one of the most stables in terms of its power. And so both of them were art lovers. His wife Adelaide of Burgundy, she was also a patroness, and she was customizing a lot of stuff, a lot of book illuminations. So yeah, so also important, and overall, so she was a very important also figure. She was as influenceable as her husband. So we actually have some coins with her portraits. We actually have so I'm gonna tell you, we actually have some signatures on some of diplomatic, like very important diplomatic papers. Her signatures. The output of the Ottonian scriptoriums were extensive, during the creation of which most of the women illuminators were an active part of this process. Among them is the nun Diemut, so another name that we know for sure, from the Sovereign Monastery in Bavaria. There is a text from the 16th century which lists 45 books in the decoration of which she participated, creating initials decorated with ornaments. However, as far as I remember, a lot of them are lost and we don't have them. Another non-illuminator we know is Huda. So she rewrote and illustrated the Sermon of Saint Bartholomew. In one of the initials, this is very interesting, the nun is believed to have inscribed her self-portrait, which is currently the first known such image of a nun. Out of all of the Europe, it was in Germany and Austria that nuns played the most active role in the creation of books, and their work can be traced back to 8th century. Although, as I already mentioned, surviving, oh my god, I'm sorry, examples of early works are very rare and relatively modest. Modern researchers is increasingly showing evidence of their active production of books of the highest quality by the 12th century. In the combined monasteries of Admont in Salzburg, a community of nuns worked to copy more than 200 surviving books of this library. Documentary evidence was also found that from the 13th till 16th century in Germany, more than 400 female scribes transcribed more than 4,000 actually books, and also there were found 48 very active actually scriptorias in female monasteries. In the 12th century, the creation of manuscripts research reaches a new level. Now this activity is not exclusively the prerogative of monasteries, so now secular artists also was able to take part in illumination. And so sometimes, it was they were making some kind of deals with monasteries, so they would come to monastery, for example, for 1 year, and they were living in the monastery. They the artist lived in the monastery, he was fed there, well, basically living his best life, as we can say, but he was the only thing that he needed to do is to paint, and well, also had some kind of rules. He was not obviously obligated to live completely like a monk, but some rules he needed to be still follow them. But yeah, and after the work is done, after he was finished, he would yeah, the monks or nuns would say him like, bye bye, you need to go, and they would get back to their secular life in the cities. So this is like, they started to get popular starting from 12th century. So, for example, again, talking about Paris, situation was one of the best there in terms of, you know, the secular artists, illuminators. There were a lot of them in Paris, however, not with women in this field. So there were a lot of men, but there were not a lot of women. And so you know, so analysis of tax documents show that in the period from 1292 till like 1313, this was the industry with the least number of women in it. I mean, the industry of illumination in Paris. From the few known data, we know about the existence of Martha, a parchment maker who worked with her husband. Researcher Françoise Baron, while studying tax records of the 13th, 14th century, found reference to eight female illuminators. However, we don't have any examples of their works preserved. We don't know their names, like nothing. It is also known that Master Honoré, he was the founder of Parisian School of Illumination, was assisted by his daughter and her husband. However, you know, because it was considered that it was, you know, works of Master Honoré, obviously they had they were obligated to maintain certain style. So now it is very, very hard to, I think it's like actually almost impossible to divide who made what. So yeah, so we just know that Master Honoré, he worked with his daughter, but who made what illumination exactly, it's, again, it's very hard to tell. Another researcher, Milliard Miss, at one time attributed several of the best miniatures from the Duc de Berry collection to the woman illuminator Godenoir. She was a daughter of another professional illuminator, Jean Benoit, with whom they also worked together. In the 13th century, nuns concentrated their work on books for private devotions. Most of the surviving manuscripts from this period associated with nunneries are psalters and liturgical books, as well as some antiphons and graduals. Those are like books of hymns. It is known that many noble secular and religious women had their own personal psalters. So Dominican nuns in Germany created many psalters for their own use, despite the Dominican order ban for women to create books. Another interesting also group of women that existed in this period of time was called beggins. So there were women who remained lay women, but they led a lifestyle as nuns without entering a monastery. So we know some of the examples of these books that were rewritten and illuminated for their own needs. And there is also a group of Liège psalters that is identified as the works of beggins, as the illuminations have this, you know, this naive, this Romanesque style, which was already not popular. It's already mentioned because there was a period of time, there was a Gothic period of time already, and because of that, the researchers ruled out the possibility of creating this work of creating these works by professional artists. At the same time, there is a will of one of the beggins in which it is said that she leaves money for the production of these psalters. Graduals and antiphons, those are books of hymns that could also be performed by nuns, were also a popular type of church book. One such antiphon, which was created in 1244, the monastery of Nazareth in Liers, Belgium, states that the copyist was the nun Agnes and the musical notes were made by the nun Christina. The Nazareth antiphon is richly decorated with filigree initials and patterns of unique colors. This is the only preserved example of book art from this monastery. We know the name of Lupa de Speculio. She acted as a scriptor during the creation of the one antiphons and as an illuminator and scriptor for currently unknown work of the 14th century. So the antiphon of Lupa de Speculia is noted for its high quality, although assumptions are made analyzing linguistically the text, where she's mentioned that only filigree initials belong to her hand. Another book that created a lot of controversies like among scholars and researchers is the Gisella's Code. So the first page of this book states that Gisela von Karsenbrock, a 13th century nun from the Germany side of Rulle, wrote and illuminated the manuscript. Several self-portraits appears also in the manuscript. So in one scene, she is shown singing with her other nuns, and she is shown with an open book. In other, she is solo and she's standing on her knees and she's praying. And controversies arise due to the high quality of the execution of the manuscript. So many researchers believe that Gisela is only a customer of this book. And for you just to understand, like, so men researchers, this is like the only, like literally the only reason why they don't believe that this book was executed by women, because it has because it's a too high quality book. That's all. And I mean, like, this is like modern researchers, not like, 17th century research, modern researchers. So obviously, we can see and we can say that book has at least few illuminators, few scriptors. So it's not a work of one single person. However, even in this context, male researchers, they are not even looking into the hypothetical situation that it still could have been created by women. Okay, maybe not Gisela herself, but other women scribe from her like nunnery, Also, it is a topic that is not considered at all, because, as I said, because it's a too high quality work. Okay, so this is believed, like a lot of male scholars, they believe that it was a customized work from some kind of other, independent or male, or some like male scriptorian from somewhere else. Walter's homily is a collection of sermons arranged according to the liturgical year to be read during the meal in the refectory. So this manuscript is dated to the early 15th century and belongs to Rhine region. It is decorated with more than 24 miniatures and initials, and the question of authorship here is also open, whether it was were nuns themselves or whether it was an order to a professional craftsman. The only thing that is known for sure at the moment is that the nuns somewhat redrawn the homily. Bright colors and patterns borders have been added to some pages, and parts of the text were repainted in gold leaf. So it can be noted that despite the fact that in the period of the 13th century, many manuscripts began to be produced in cities by secular masters, nuns still continued to practice this ancient monastic occupation. But already at this time, the works of nuns were ridiculed, and even such a concept as nuns' books appeared, a term with a distinctive derogatory connotation. So as far as I remember, in German it was something like Nunnebrüche or something like this. I'm sorry, I don't know German. Researchers know that even among books in nunnery libraries, less than 15% bear women's names or titles, and by the 12th century, less than 1% now of these books were authored, so either scribed or illuminated by women. So, and in addition, also very briefly we'll say, because I read this article and also, I was so hyped up, I don't know why, but so in addition to all of this, things that we are finding in some records about women scribes, we have some archaeological also stuff, finds. So in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, I will obviously leave down below this article so you were able to read it yourself. So Science magazine, they published this article, this finding of this archaeologist. So basically, those archaeologists, they were digging in one of the places in Germany. There were some monastery back then there, and it was destroyed in fire and, well, never rebuilt again. And there was the cemetery also there. They find a body there, they find a skeleton remains there, and they called her B78, so it was a nun. And we have some stuff going on there, so it's not really understandable what's going on, because they found this woman, so it says to be she was like in her 40s or 60s, something like that, and they're dating her by the late 10th 12th century, something in this period of time. What is interesting, so at the root of her teeth they found and they found the little parts of lapis lazuris. So it is a pigment, a very actually, I mean, it still is. I mean, it's the pigment that can be found just in Afghanistan. And so it is a very, very expensive. And back then it was even more expensive, because you can imagine, you know, that how you need the transfer from Afghanistan to Europe. So yeah, so it was, this pigment was used just for the, you know, very exquisite works, very like rich works. So this is a unique stuff. So she was fine with this. However, you see where is the problem? So they analyzed her skeleton remains, and they haven't found, you know, any stress on her skeleton that will, you know, that showed that she was like working very hard, you know, by sitting for a lot of hours. So this, you know, led to a few theories. So four of them actually. So first of all, that she was an illuminator, and she was like, but the fact that she didn't have any damage in her skeleton that would show that she was again sitting for a long period of time, it's like really like very, very unfortunate, as we can say. The second theory is that she was just a pigment maker, but still it proves that this monastery had scriptoriums where other women were working as well as scribes or illuminators, and that they were able to make a very exquisite illuminations. Another theory was that those two last ones are very like they are the more like more unfortunate or less possible. So one of them is that she was actually, so lapis lazuli was also used as a form of treatment for the eyes. It's popular obviously in Middle Eastern parts, right, because it's easier to receive this material from in that region, but in Europe this treatment started to be popular starting from like 12th century, and we are talking like a bit before that. So yeah, so it was pretty unfortunate that she was using it for as her medicine. And fourth one is that she might have, you know, so there's this practice when you're kissing the icons, you know, and I don't know, I mean, as far as I understood, it was kind of popular in Catholicism back then, because in like Orthodox, showing it myself as though like I'm not a Catholic, also like I was baptized in Catholicism. I'm not an Orthodox. So, and in Orthodoxy there's this is a very like known practice. Everyone is kissing these icons, you know, and like all of this germs is going around like this is, you know, this practice of kissing is known starting from like 6th century, something like this, but it became most active, became more popular in 14th, 15th century. And in addition, the scientists noted that this osculation, which is a kiss, would raise those clots of pigment a bit, you know, higher higher when they were found on her teeth, so something like this. You know, very interesting stuff. So most likely we are talking about some kind of pigment maker or illuminator or scribe, but well, unfortunately we cannot prove it now for sure. I don't know whether they're studying her more still or not, but I mean, I will leave down below. Obviously there's like in way more detail. So this is everything that I have for today. Sorry for, you know, me rushing up sometimes today, because, you know, I really wanted to tell you everything like as much as possible, but without, you know, making this video like 3 hour long, because I don't have memory anywhere for these long videos, and no one will watch this. But just, you know, this is like a very brief, this is like, you know, just top of the iceberg that I found, that yeah, that we know, and that, you know, is still need to be researched, all of this topic. So as I said, I will link down below some of the books, so check this out. A lot of interesting, really a lot of interesting stuff. So yeah, so I will be finishing here. Because to be honest, I mean, I think I won't be very satisfied with this video, because I haven't said even a half of what I wanted, but well, it is what it is. So yeah, so I really hope that it was interesting for you, and hope you will, go further into discovering this topic. I wish you good day, good morning, good evening, good night, whatever, whenever you are. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hope to see you in the next videos. Bye bye.